And welcome to SMP's COVID-19 Business Continuity and Remote Workforce Solutions webinar series. This week's topic is a security briefing, remote workers and your assets. Today we're joined by Jonathan Borgeson, who is SMP's Security Solutions Specialist, and Scott Carruthers, who is our Principal Architect in Security. During this session, they're going to go through a number of topics, and if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A section of the WebEx itself, and we'll address those as we go at the very end. If there's things that don't get addressed during the session, please feel free to reach out to your account manager or the contact information for Jonathan and Scott, which they will show you at the end. And with that, I am going to go ahead and hand it over.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. As Jennifer mentioned, my name is Jonathan Borgeson. I am the security overlay for the sales team here at SMP. Been in the security industry for just about 11 years now, and thought I saw everything that there could be to be seen up until about 3 weeks ago. So some interesting things are happening now that we're hopefully going to shed some light on for you today.
Yes, and for anyone I have not met, my name is Scott Carruthers, and I'm a principal architect at SMP. Along with those responsibilities, I also co-head the SMP security practice with Jonathan. I largely come from a technical background, so along with being a CCAE and Cisco collaboration, I've spent a bulk of the last few years developing automation and DevOps strategies, primarily in cybersecurity realms. And in addition, on coming to SMP in 2013, I helped launch our managed security practice today known as our Smart Center. So I'm obviously very familiar with that portion of our organization that has many cybersecurity focuses as well.
Great. Yeah, so what we're going to be talking about today, it's important to note that we're all kind of living in unforeseen times right now as far as the length of time that people are going to be needed to work from home. Scott and I are also very aware that this topic that we're talking about is probably something that a lot of you are hearing about on a day-to-day basis and potentially have already sat through other webinars. We really try to take an approach to this today and focus it on a more of a unique way. Now that some of this, kind of chaos of figuring out how to have everybody work from home has settled down, and hopefully you all have your workers up and going, is kind of the idea of now what, right? Now that everybody is forced to be working from home and are doing so, what do we need to do to our security practice to make sure that we're meeting these new challenges that we're starting to see on a day-to-day basis? So with that, we'll start to dive into some of the content here.
So as we begin discussion about emerging cybersecurity threats and the new landscape that has been forced upon us via the coronavirus, might be a surprise that we begin with a photo or a picture of Isaac Newton, who lived and studied, and his primary work was in the mid-17th century. But the reason that we begin here is I think it's interesting to, as we delve into our recommendations for the new and primarily remote workforce that the current pandemic has forced upon us. I think it's interesting to reflect on the unique opportunities that the changing landscape provides to us and exposes to us. So to be clear, when we talk about opportunity, our families and health and the survival of our business strategies are paramount at this point in time, and certainly we all hope that the pandemic ends quickly, and we would all love for the pandemic to end tomorrow if possible. But in the landscape that we're presented with, in any and all circumstances, we are offered unique opportunities through rapid shifts, and certainly today we're presented with some unique opportunities. But any of those opportunities that we're presented with will certainly be thwarted if we're not able to protect our intellectual property and interest through proper cybersecurity mechanisms that we'll delve into greatly. But in an age synonymous with the one that we now currently face and that's been forced upon us during the Great Plague of London in the mid-17th century, Isaac Newton was confronted with similar isolation to what we are today presented with, and the challenges and unique new circumstances that our workers are confronted with. And he utilized that period of time to in quarantine to foster some of humanity's greatest discoveries. So as Newton was quarantined at a safe distance from other carriers of the disease, it provided him with a quiet serenity in an environment that allowed a mind like Newton's to journey uninterrupted into the farthest reaches of his imagination. And I think today we're presented with some of those unique opportunities as well. As our businesses shift, it's going to open up a lot of opportunities that during an unfortunate time we can take advantage of. So the analogy to Newton here certainly is not to suggest that we each are going to discover calculus during this period of time. That would probably be a rather aggressive goal, but I think we can make great discoveries and realize things in ourselves and some efficiencies in our work that we will bring with us as we exit this period as well. One of my favorite sayings in guiding principles is that distraction often leads to the destruction of imagination and innovation. So I think today we're presented with a reality that allows us to focus and allows our imagination and innovation possibly to reach new levels. And we awaken a time when we'll have less distraction and the possibility of greater innovation that's spawned from it. I believe, my personal belief, and I believe Jonathan's and SMP's beliefs are that organizations that are able to build secure business practices in a rapidly emerging remote workforce will discover new efficiencies, create new products and solutions that are ripe for this new changing landscape. And those that will embrace these new realities may survive beyond what was possible prior, discover things that were not possible prior, and those that struggle to evolve and those that are not able to adapt security measures and other foundational components will realize that a bleak path may lie ahead in this new landscape. So as we kind of segue more into specifically cybersecurity, we believe the acceleration of work at home for a vast number of employees during the coronavirus outbreak and other shifting paradigms that are associated with the time period will not evaporate when current and immediate health scares are no more and evaporate either based on a cure or we're somehow able to further quarantine and get on the other side of this. So our belief is that these shifts will leave a permanent fingerprint on the future of work. So I think in a lot of ways, the future of work is being accelerated and forced upon us. And in that future of work, we believe as we exit, we'll discover that there's a lot of efficiencies and benefits to remote work, a lot of possibilities of securing workers that don't need to be in our geography. Also, as we exit, employees may question, why do I need to go back to an office when it's been so efficient not to have the commute into the office, and I've had greater focus and greater innovation and allows our imaginations once again to run uninterrupted. And akin to that, from an employer's perspective, employers may question, why do we need to have 20-story office buildings, especially in remote locations, when we now have had the remote worker paradigm kind of forced upon us, and now we've realized a lot of the benefits and the possibilities of that, and employers may not choose to completely go back to business as usual that existed before this pandemic. So obviously, to realize a lot of these opportunities born out of this new landscape, and to retain prior practices where necessary to run our daily lives and to run our business operations. What follows this morning is our exploration into immediate cybersecurity concerns and also recommended paths that are centered largely on a newly adaptive remote workforce.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. So, with this new shift in how companies are running their operations, right, it obviously creates new vulnerabilities for the bad guys to try to take advantage of, right? And we're already starting to see an enormous uptick in the amount of targeted attacks, phishing attacks that are occurring now, really on a minute-to-minute basis. So, just some supporting facts, right? Talos, which is the largest cyber intelligence organization in the world, is seeing these upticks, which are, again, have never really been seen before as far as how fast and frequently these things are coming out. And what are they really playing to, right? They're they're playing to any phishing campaign that we've ever seen in the past is designed to try to enforce the amount of clicks that phishing email gets, right? So typically we saw a lot of that around payroll, right? There's a problem with your pay stub, click on the attached link to solve the issue, right? And what are the two things that are going to make people click on that email? One is their health and their family's health. So to see, phishing emails that look like they're coronavirus information, or now what we're seeing a lot of around too is around the stimulus package that the U.S. government's pushing out to, qualified people of emails, phishing emails going out, saying that they need additional information before they can provide the stimulus thing. So very sophisticated ways of going about trying to get people to click on their link and get infected. The biggest vulnerability in my mind, though, is how quickly organizations had to adjust to keep business up and going. There's an organization that I work with very closely that had a few thousand work from home users, and within 5 days, that number quadrupled to be able to make sure that the organization's workforce was able to work and business would continue on as normal. Well, with moving that quickly, the number one thing that starts to get put on the back burner is that company's security strategy, right? The time of being able to properly architect a security practice around work from home users, unfortunately got thrown out the door for a lot of companies because they needed to move so quickly to make sure that the business was up and going. So now we need to start to circle back. Right now, again, as I mentioned in the beginning, now that companies are working from home, their workforce is working from home, and we're all adjusting to this. Now let's take a look back at what we did and how to better start to secure that new environment that beforehand, right, was not there.
So our belief at SMP is that it's a rather well-known and universally held belief that malicious actors will take advantage of any circumstance that they possibly can. But to expand on Jonathan's points and just to give some examples, for anyone that may not be aware of the seriousness of this and the depths that malicious actors are willing to sink to, we just wanted to provide a couple of brief examples. So these are two phishing campaigns that were leveraged towards vulnerable individuals, and they both are eliciting understandable fears, and they're taking advantage of compromised remote worker statuses. So the first example is a sample provided once again by Cisco Talos, and as you can see on the left-hand depiction, this is masquerading as a vendor shipping announcement. So often these compromises may be rather sophisticated, and through due diligence and research by the malicious actors, they will research organizations, vendors, and supply chains and suppliers and appear to be coming from apparent well-known sources by masquerading the source address. In actuality, these are being spoofed in an attempt to provoke execution of the attached file that we see in this sample. That could then provoke malware installation or could also provoke the initiation of a command and control chain. The second example is a very prevalent sample, an example coming from the United Kingdom, masquerading as a public service announcement. So as you can read in the text yourselves, it purports to be it reports the recipient will be subject to a fine based on their lack of compliance with government mandates surrounding the coronavirus restrictions. So stay-at-home mandates and things like that in the United Kingdom, these malicious actors are taking advantage of. So as you can see from this text, people would be very vulnerable to click through on this because of the concerns of fines and not following government mandates. So we don't think that it should come to a surprise that based on a large amount of samples in recent years, malicious actors often do not have much of a moral compass and will certainly take advantage of the current reality wherever and however they can. To guide us a little bit further into our upcoming discussions, as we begin to explore our recommendations of how we can effectively lock down the newly remote workforce, We certainly have a belief that targeted solutions address only a small aspect of the attack chain. And it's very prominent in today's age. And over the last couple of weeks, we have a lot of announcements that are not truly protecting our workers, but are more pointed technologies that only guard, once again, against this very small part and piece of the attack chain. So in our discussions today, we're going to provide some guidance on the following objectives that we see listed on this slide. So first, targeted solutions such as VPN tunneling, remote VPN tunnels, multi-factor authentication, and endpoint protection certainly all play critical roles in a mature cybersecurity strategy. I think that goes without saying. We're certainly not advocating that we don't leverage such solutions. Without the bedrock and the foundation of a cybersecurity remote worker holistic strategy, which would include identification and remediation of compromised hosts and network analytics and intelligence. These pointed technologies certainly will not truly protect our organizations. We also see a critical role, and probably goes without saying, of educating our new largely remote workforce amidst the changing landscape, and we believe that education needs to happen immediately. And lastly, while our belief is not in isolated silos technologies and that we need to have mature holistic policies, we will offer our recommendations for immediate and long-term additions to layered security approaches. Just going through those one by one.
Yep, sorry about that. So based on what Scott was just saying there first, right? So any organization that's building on a security practice really needs to start with the policies and procedures of what they're trying to secure and how they're going to do that. And as I mentioned earlier, with the speed at which companies had to adjust of how they're doing the business, right, then this critical step, more than likely, I'm not saying that everybody, but more than likely was missed. So now, with the workforce 100% being from home, we need to start to go back and start to create the policies and procedures now to create the game plan of how, when, and where we're going to now protect our end users working from home as well as our corporate assets and corporate network. You know, these policies are not just as simple as, you know, saying we're going to work from home and they need to have VPN and multi-factor and all that stuff. It's really the game plan. So if somebody gets infected now, or if there's a breach, how are we going to handle this? How are we going to remediate? And obviously that has now changed with all that workforce being from home, right? If your security policy says if an end user gets infected, we're going to re-image that laptop and basically factory reset it and re-image it, how are you going to do that now if that person is working from home and that person is not in the office now where the IT department is? So to be able to put those steps in place and put them on paper makes it for a more efficient process of understanding kind of worst case scenarios and how we are now going to shift our security strategy to meet these new vulnerabilities and new objectives. From that, right, the key thing that we're all trying to do is to protect. I do a lot of these different speaking engagements, whether it be a webinar or at a conference. And if anybody's heard me speak before, you know, the number one goal is always to protect. However, it's nearly impossible to do so. So with that in mind, you know, the number one goal that everybody tried to initiate immediately was that VPN tunnel. Saw an enormous uptick. I was on a call this morning with a manufacturer that said that their multi-factor was up, I think, 400% in the past 2 weeks. Those are very critical aspects of being able to provide that work from home. However, I want to stress that those are not the only things that we need to focus on to make sure that our end users and our corporate assets are safe. The interesting thing about this whole situation now is with that VPN tunnel, right, that's a tunnel back to your network. So potentially your network protocols, security protocols are now being enforced on that device. Well, what happens if that end user turns off their VPN tunnel, right? Or what happens if they allow their child who they're teaching at home to use their laptop, and for a homework assignment, they're going on Google and open up different articles that potentially have malicious activity going on within them. So the idea of having an advanced endpoint protection is critical to try to protect our assets. It's kind of unbelievable the amount of companies that I speak to day to day that still are using traditional signature-based AV and don't have an advanced endpoint protection tool or an EDR tool on their devices. Part of that was they thought that their devices were safe. They're behind the corporate perimeter. They're behind their firewalls. They're behind their other security tools. But now that that perimeter is essentially gone, companies really need to start to look at providing a newer, more effective endpoint protection tool on these devices to make sure that if something does happen, it is recognized as quickly as possible. You get the visibility into what's happening on the endpoint and the potential of remediation. So that idea of re-imaging that laptop to get rid of that infection, right? With some of these next generation tools, you're able to remediate through that tool remotely, which obviously automatically creates efficiencies and greater levels of protection. Another great tool if organizations are able to do it, and again, depending on how long this goes on for or how many companies want to adopt this work from home mentality moving forward, is VDI, right? VDI is essentially that tunnel, like that VPN, that makes sure that your network security protocols are always being enforced. And whether that laptop that you have it on, or even if you have a thin client at home, provides you that level of protection and almost a protected bubble around your corporate information, corporate data. So step two, and this does not go along just from work from home, but it's more crucial now, is the visibility aspect. You know, as I just was mentioning with that signature-based AV, the idea of having protected assets on your environment with the multi-layered was always the approach. Well, now that's been kind of flipped upside down. So now we really need to start to have the ability to look at behavioral analytics, those network analytics that Scott mentioned earlier, and be able to automate remediation, right, with intelligence around AI platforms to better secure our corporate assets. One of these examples I've been given a lot lately is, you know, if I was a user on my corporate network and all of a sudden I try to push out, let's say, 5 gigs of data, and I had my firewall set to be able to put an alert on if somebody was trying to push out that much data, then that would be flagged and potentially stopped and remediated. But now with everybody being home, again, those protocols are now changed. So it's become much more difficult to see who has access, what are they pulling down and what are they pulling out, and is that a legitimate business use for that? So to be able to have this visibility in the network of what people are doing and what information they have access to is just as critical as that protection piece of our work from home users. Tying onto that visibility piece and be able to pull that data, right? The idea of being able to recognize what data is now leaving the environment. For anybody who has any kind of compliances around PCI, GDPR, New York Shield Act, any of these things that have data privacy regulations on them, well, now, again, if your work from home force is accessing that data, your strategy that you had to become compliant is now shifting. Because now how are we ensuring that that end user is not saving sensitive data to their device, right? Or how do we know that me, who is not supposed to have access to that data, ended up pulling down a file and pulling that out of the network to my work from home device? So to be able to see that data, provide data security around that, and also to be able to identify if an insider threat is gaining access to certain information, certain file shares, again, is more critical than ever. It's probably maybe one of the most important aspects of the different areas I discussed today.
So as we transition into education, reflecting back on some of Jonathan's thoughts, my personal opinion when we talk about VDI or VMware Horizon remote desktops, what an awesome solution for a time that of this newly remote workforce. And certainly we understand that VMware Horizon and InView are not things that we can deploy overnight. So it may have to be a long-term strategy. But as I said earlier, if we are left in a expanse following this period where those remote workers will not return to work as they did prior. What an awesome solution going forward, in which we can provide a user